Hello everyone and welcome back to the Retro Recall. I hope you're doing awesome. Today we have a beautiful sight back on the bench. We have our IBM ThinkCentre M50 computer back, and I couldn't wait to get this back out of storage and back on the bench. This particular system came to us from a couple provinces away from a seller who sold it to the Retro Recall and essentially packed it just up beautifully and shipped it to us and opened it up, and it's in perfect condition. So it came with the computer, obviously the monitor, and the keyboard and mouse. And if you haven't seen that video, check it out right there. Definitely recommend you checking it out because it kind of gives you the backstory of the system and what we did. Essentially, one of the things I discovered while working on this computer were the capacitors. So this came from the capacitor plague era. So fortunately, we had some capacitors arrive now. So we're actually able to take the system apart and get these capacitors replaced. So that's what we're going to do in today's video. We have lots to do, so let's get right to it. Okay, and here we are, and everything's looking good. So we have our tower on the side here, all ready to take apart. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you have an eject kind of button here, but you press the button and you open up the side panel. Makes it fairly easy for, ideally, a toolless design. So one of the things we're going to do is just start taking parts apart because we really need to get to this motherboard. And, you know, I've never taken one of these systems apart before, so we're just going to kind of take it part by part, piece by piece to get to where we need to go here. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is kind of remove all these little pieces here. And, you know, it's pretty straightforward when you work on these systems. You know, OEM systems are a little tougher as you're working on them just because of the amount of components and what have you. But, I mean, ideally, they make them easy enough that you're able to start taking these apart without getting into too much difficulty. So, I mean, pretty straightforward. We're just going to remove the ribbon cables here one by one. This is the floppy cable. There we go. Move that from the motherboard, and we'll do the same thing here with the IDE cable. And that IDE cable feeds just the optical drive, which is perfect. And then, of course, we have SATA in this computer as well. So it was in the era of both the SATA and IDE kind of transition there. So here we are. We have the floppy power moving pretty quickly here. We have SATA power to the hard drive. And I'm only removing this because I want to get these wires out of the way instead of it kind of overlapping the motherboard. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And the same thing with the SATA connector on the back of the hard disk and from the motherboard. Pretty straightforward. And, you know, we're going to go fairly quickly here, like I mentioned, just because the bulk of the work is going to be working on getting those capacitors replaced. So what I'm doing here, as you can see, it's very quickly freeing up the visual area of where we need to work. So there we go. We'll continue to move this forward. Now I do notice that this is an adapter here. I'm just going to remove that for the back ventilation, just to move it out of the way so we don't have a wire running across. Okay, so we've removed all that. Next thing we're going to do is remove it looks like just this one connector from the motherboard, which controls all the front kind of LEDs, power switch, things like that. It's nice that Lenovo, I say Lenovo just so used to saying it, but IBM put that there, which is great. We're also going to remove the RAM from the motherboard just to have that out of the way. There we are. We have those removed now. I still see some wires kind of just tucked up inside here. We'll get those removed as well. Okay, we have those gone, which is good. Now, we have the motherboard itself, I think, is going to be pretty good. I think it's just going to be able to clear this area here. I'm seeing, you know, this kind of enclosure here, but I don't see a way to remove it from the chassis itself. You know, usually there's a couple screws here, something I can remove it, but I'm not seeing anything firsthand when I'm looking around. I think that's pretty much mounted into the main frame of the system, but I think if we just remove the screws to the motherboard, we should be able to remove it from the board. And I just noticed there's another connector here, as well as the Pentium 4 power connector that we have here as well. So we have all those kind of removed. I'm just going to tuck them away over here, just in the corner, so they kind of stay out of the way. So we're going to start removing the screws from this because, well, there's lots of screws. And ideally, we're going to pull this away from the back, slide it this way, and then we're going to angle it up and out. We should be able to clear everything based on what I see here to be able to access the motherboard and get it out of the system. IBM doesn't use standard Phillips screws in their systems most of the time, unfortunately. So you'll see that they are nut driven, or in this particular case, they do have a slot flathead as well if you want to use that. But, you know, my experience with that has never been great. So I'm just going to remove them using this nut driver here instead. So I'm just going to go around and remove all of these screws. Okay, so I've removed all of those screws from the motherboard. So I'm just going to slide the motherboard back here away from that grounding kind of strip there. And we're going to do exactly as I mentioned. We're going to slide it back, tip it up. There we are. So we have the motherboard completely removed from the system. So I'm just going to get the bench all cleaned up and get this all ready to start looking at and working on. Okay, and here we are with the motherboard out in front of us now. So you can see the cap here. Specifically, this one is what drew my attention to it when we started looking at the motherboard itself. So you can see that the cap is definitely bulging. You can see, probably have a good look of it there. You can see ooze is starting to come out of it there. So this is one that definitely needs to be replaced. And my rule of thumb is, when you replace one of these caps, so this is a 10 volt, 1500 microfarad capacitor. So I'm going to replace all the ones in that series, because if you look, this one looks perfectly fine, but this one over here looks like it's bulging as well. And the same thing over here, this one looks pretty good. And I'm just looking around to see if there's any others. So we have that one, 2, we have 3, 4, and I'm just looking around to see if there's any more on the motherboard. So no, I'm only seeing the 4 that are there. The rest of the capacitors themselves, what I'm looking at, look in great shape. You know, it all depends on the manufacturer at the time, back in the capacitor plague day, that, you know, these boards, unfortunately, in these systems started to fail because these capacitors will eventually leak and cause damage. The electrolytics inside of them will actually leak in other components and start to do damage to related areas around the capacitor. So it's very important to get this kind of, you know, taken care of as soon as you can. Now, I let this sit for 6 months. It has not been powered up, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily. Yes, obviously turning it on and using it accelerates the process. But again, having it stored in my storage area, you know, I've been thinking about this quite a bit over time, and this is just one of those systems I really want to save. So we have one here, and I'm just going to do a little, you know, this Sharpie comes off with alcohol, so I'm not too worried about it, isopropyl alcohol. We have another one here, and we have another one, big guy right here. And I say big guy because this one looks like to be the worst guy here, so we'll get that removed. We have 2 little guys, and then this one here. Okay, we'll get this one here. So I can get all of this without having to remove the CPU. It's already socketed. We're not going to do a full cleanup on the system just yet. I do want to get the RAM slots all cleaned off though, and get them sprayed with some contact cleaner just to kind of clean them out, but we shouldn't have any issues there. But yeah, these are the culprits here that we need to fix today, and we're going to start doing that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is get my flux pen, because we need to put some flux to help out the process here. Okay, let's flip the motherboard around, and we're going to see all the areas that I started with. So I'm going to do the more, I guess the harder one here, just kind of where it is. And I'm looking at to see where the negative. So it's important for polarity, negative and positive areas of the capacitor. So if you look, the negative, which is that strip, that indicator strip you see here, they're all of them look like they are, well, except this one. So we'll do these three and note these three, but these three are pointing towards the I/O of the board. And this one here looks like it is pointing towards the front of the tower, or where it would be the front of the computer. Okay, that's good to know. All right, I'm going to flip it around just because I wanted to make note of that before we start to install them again, right? To take them out and install them. So we're going to do the one right by the chipset first. So I'm using my flux pen, just putting flux around there. Just helps me get that that removed easier. And the unfortunate thing is when you look at these, all the pins are bent on these capacitors. What they did was they pushed them back and down. I mean, we can work on straightening those. Just see if we can use the side cutters here just to very briefly pull them up. It's just very little to do when you do this. And you just need to tip them up just a little bit, just enough to get the solder sucker or solder remover, whatever you want to call it, around and down. And that's it. Same thing here. There we are. So remove that nicely. And we're just going to take that cap out and just wiggle it. And you can't see what I'm doing. Apologies. And that's it. Capacitor removed. That's simple. And again, beauty of having a solder remover is makes a big difference to when you start working on this sort of electronics. And this capacitor itself looks to be pretty okay. I'm not seeing any leakage or any other damage, so it's important to inspect it because if there is damage, we need to clean. I'm going to clean the motherboard anyway with a solution. You'll see that in a moment. But I just want to make absolutely sure there's zero damage to any of the surrounding areas here. And I'm not seeing anything here as I'm looking through. So that's really, really good. And usually, you know, if there's other capacitors that could be leaking, even though they're not bulging, they could be leaking, they will leave evidence around this area as well. And I'm not seeing any of that here. So we'll continue on here. So pretty straightforward. If you use the flux pen, just allows it to go on. Now, if you run into problems with this, like if you're working on doing this and you're not able to, unfortunately, get some of this off, is that you can add solder to this. And by adding solder, it allows you to, it just kind of mixes with the old solder, and it just makes it easier to be able to remove the solder. Okay, I'm just doing the same thing again. I'm just being very gentle here. There's zero force I'm doing here. And there we are. So you can see that the capacitor fell right out when I did that. And this is definitely one of the bad ones. So we're going to take a look at the board to make sure there's no damage. I'm just going to put this over here for now. And let's flip it around and take a look. I don't think there's anything based on what I'm seeing, but yeah, I mean, there's zero damage. We're catching it at the right time here. There's been no damage to the board, which is absolutely excellent. There we are. And that cap should come right out as well. A little bit of wiggling. No force, no effort. And there we are. Nice and easy. Okay, and this one looks to be bad. As you can tell, it is bulging there compared to the other one we just took out. Oh, that one's bulging. There we go. So you can see the difference with those two. This is the bad cap. This is probably an okay cap, but again, it's important to replace them all. Okay, I'm just going to redraw my circle here just to make sure we don't lose track of what we're doing. Now, the other thing I want to do here is I see there's a little bit of extra solder that's still left in the hole here. So what you do is just, I mean, there's different things you can do here, but I'm going to just take some solder braid and put it in here just to suck up any extra solder that we might have in the hole. So the next thing I'd like to do is clean up the motherboard because I want to leave it just like this. You know, we'll flip it around the other side, just take a look at the physical board to make sure everything's good as we stated. And I see 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they all look good. What I like to do with these when you go through this process is put a little isopropyl alcohol on it, a little bit of a brush to clean up anything that might be on the board. So what we'll do is just a little capful of isopropyl alcohol. That's all I do. And I'll just go over those areas because I'm using 99%. So it dissipates really, really quickly. It just makes sure, this side looks really good anyway. The other side is going to require a little more kind of cleanup, but that's okay. And this guy here. You want to be very careful you don't do any damage to any surrounding areas in the process, but just make sure that the work area is nice and clean. Okay, now we'll flip the board around, and leaving the processor in there kind of gives us a nice little edge there to rest the board on an angle, and it makes it easier for everyone to see as well. Okay, so the 3 capacitors that were closest to the I/O shield, we'll do this one first just because here we have the negative that's pointing towards the back of the computer, the I/O shield. But if you notice on the motherboard itself as well, it shows a little plus symbol down inside here. You can probably see it right there, right where I'm putting my brush. So you can see where there's a little positive symbol. So if you did get to a situation, most motherboards have that noted so that you don't have the issue. Any number of things can happen if you put them wrong polarity, so you don't want to do that. Okay, so we have our new capacitor there, and we can do this a couple of ways. We can do one at a time, do multiple things like that. I'm going to do one at a time just for the sake of showing everybody what we're doing. So you do is just kind of just do that, and it holds it in place. So the capacitor is in all the way. Yeah, I've double checked that. It looks good. And you just go like this. It just kind of holds the capacitor in place. And we'll use our flux pen. Just put a little bit of flux there where we're going to be soldering. Then we take our solder and our soldering iron. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so once we've gone ahead and completed that, we just take our little side clip here, side cutters, and that's all we do. We cut off the leads, and that's pretty much it. Just like that. And there we go. We have our replacement capacitor back in motion. Let's go back over here and look. There's our brand new capacitor, perfectly installed, no issues, no wobble, nothing. Okay, I'm going to continue on and do the remaining capacitors. So I'm just going to triple check them all first before we start to do any sort of cleanup. So I'm looking at the ones we've done, and we can see one here. That's excellent. This one here, excellent. And you want to do is just double check to make sure there's nothing wrong with the soldering, to make sure nothing's loose. Everything looks really good there. So now we have 4 perfectly replaced capacitors, the 10 volt, 1500 microfarad capacitors, the 4 of them right there. They're happy caps for sure. Okay, yeah, and again, I'm just doing a quadruple check on all the rest of the capacitors. Generally, the ones that are closest to the heatsink generally have more susceptible or more prone, if they're a cheap capacitor, cheap quality, to overheat, just because of where they are, and it can definitely do some damage. But I'm not seeing any issues with these, and they're high. It looks like higher quality almost that were used in this area, so that's good news. And this time we'll just take some isopropyl alcohol, essentially go over the 2 areas that we did. I just spray it on here with a little bit of a squirt bottle. And I like to take a piece of paper towel and do this. It's just nice and easy. Just go over the board. It just removes and sucks up any of the the stuff there. You can see how well it cleans that whole area up by doing that. I just absolutely love this method. And we'll do the same thing for the other two. We have some isopropyl alcohol we'll just apply with the brush in the area we were working on. And I did spill some flux on the board, as you noticed earlier. So I like to get the whole area, not just where I worked on the capacitor, because you just want to make sure you get all that flux residue off the board and make sure it looks good. You don't need that sitting on the PCB at all. And you can see that the Sharpie comes right off when you do this as well. So you don't have to worry about any of that. And does a beautiful job cleaning up the PCB. Just look at that. No flex residue at all on any of this now. And everything is looking fantastic. Okay, and there we are. We have a motherboard with 4 replaced capacitors. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to get the bench cleaned up here because there's quite a bit of mess. The other thing I want to do is just kind of just dust out these RAM slots here, because I find that they collect dirt, especially right next to the fan here and the action in this area with the airflow. It's just a good practice to do. And of course, we have our trusty contact cleaner. And I just do this on any RAM that I have. Everybody knows my track record with RAM. Okay, we are good. So what I'm going to do is get the bench all cleaned up. It's quite the mess. And we will get all situated with the tower back on the bench and put everything back together. Okay, so we have the computer back on the bench, and we're going to slowly slide this guy back in just to be sure we're good to go. Slow and steady wins the race on this one. Just going to make sure all the wires are out of the way. There we go. And then we're just going to slide that back in to make sure the grounding kind of strip is there. And just double check everything to make sure it's all lining up nicely and nothing's forced. That's the key, that nothing is forced. And one thing I did before I put the motherboard in is I did wipe the underside of where the motherboard goes with isopropyl alcohol and some cleaning wipes and things. I just want to get them all cleaned up. Let's start reassembly. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So we have, let's do a recap here. So we have our hard disk plugged in using the SATA cable to SATA 1. We have our IDE cable going up to our optical drive, plugged into the primary IDE. We have our floppy connected to our floppy with the power connected to it as well. We have power to our optical. We plugged in our 4-pin for our CPU. We plugged in the 2 connectors, one for the optical audio and one for the PC speaker. We also plugged in the front header, which controls our power, our ATX power, and all those good things. So we have all that connected. And we have our 4 RAM sticks here as well. And of course, not to mention, we keep on forgetting our 4 capacitors replaced. All right, let's get the bench all sorted out. Let's get our keyboard, mouse, and monitor on the desk and get this system tested to make sure we are up and running. As you can see, we have the computer, monitor, keyboard, and mouse all branded IBM. Now let's turn on the computer to make sure the work is, well, good. Let's turn the power on. So far, so good. I left the side panel off just in case there was any smoke or anything happened. Monitor turned green. We have the IBM post screen. Love it. Okay, so good. You know what? It's just really exciting when you do work like this and you get these computers with these bad components and you rescue them before they become a problem. And there we are. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just really excited we're able to preserve a piece of history. I mean, not only when I saw this system, I was excited to get it here for just to have as part of the collection, but discovering these bad capacitors, I was really excited to be able to, work on getting these replaced. And as you can see, it's fairly straightforward. A little bit of work, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of confidence in yourself in doing that. You could do it too, and essentially, do the work, and you end up saving one of these systems from, hitting the e-waste scrapyard. So very excited to be able to do that. And another IBM ThinkCentre lives for another day. That said, if you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It makes a world of difference for the channel, helps the channel grow. Hit the notification button, change it all. You'll be notified of new content such as this. Please leave a comment down below. Do you have systems like this? Have you done your own soldering work? I'm really curious to hear. Do you have an IBM ThinkCentre? I'm really excited to hear about your comments. I respond to absolutely every one of them. I love the interaction on the channel. Always making new content. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.